This interview was conducted in the summer of 2024 at the Albuquerque home of Robert Shoofly Shufelt. Bob has a long association with Tucson, the Friends of Western Art, and the Mountain Oyster Club. We are so grateful for the time and effort Bob put into this interview, and after spending much time with Shoofly and his wonderful art books, we get it. The details and color Bob is able to conjure up with his number 2 pencil is a wonder. No two horses are the same, and every detail of cowboy and ranch life is correct because Bob lived it. We salute the horses and the professional cowboys we have come to know through the magic of Bob's drawings and sketches. We hope by watching this interview, the viewer will also learn a thing or two about the cowboy way. Back home in Wheaton, Illinois, my sister Beverly and I would spend endless days riding to glory upon the gnarled limbs of an old apple tree in the backyard. My saddle was a clothesline strung through the sleeves of a corduroy jacket. I was the Lone Ranger, who always rode the highest branch, and she was Tonto, my faithful companion down below.
I have a nickname that my brother-in-law put on me, and he called me Shoofly. But then he called his buddy, who was a dentist, Banjo, and Paul played music on the guitar, and Banjo played the banjo. My brother-in-law was very important in my art career. He was a big-time attorney in Phoenix, and he owned 2 ranches and was partners in a feedlot in California. And somebody said, well, a successful lawyer, why would he want a ranch? And I would say that if you're going to own a ranch, maybe you should be a successful lawyer. Otherwise, how are you going to afford the ranch? The family farm that I was born on was outside of Champaign, Illinois, and it belonged to my grandfather on my mother's side.
So like so many kids of that era, you grew up watching Roy Rogers and all those romantic Hollywood westerns.
Not watching, listening to, we listened to The Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, and this is a long time before television.
And so those were the first seeds of, I want to be a cowboy.
Well, I thought we lived in the West. I didn't know where the West was, and thought I was a cowboy way back then. They bought me a cardboard cowboy hat. What else did I need?
The heyday of the big art studios, with their premier illustrators, emerged after World War II and lasted into the 60s. In those houses of art worked some of the finest traditional genre painters who authentically documented their times. These artists influenced popular taste more than their contemporaries, who painted for galleries and museums. The studios employed an apprentice system that gave young artists a marvelous educational opportunity through the mentorship of esteemed professionals.
And went to Lake Forest College. Unfortunately, the art department was an all new wave art, and not really what I was looking for. I was looking for advancing my structured view of the world, and everything that they were taught was abstract things that I didn't care about, understand, and could see no way it was ever going to make a living doing that. My father was gone so much. He worked 2 jobs. And one of the jobs he worked in Chicago at R. Donnelly, the big printer company there, did Life magazine, started Sports Illustrated. And so he was gone. When he came home, of course, we were either getting up to do something, go to school, of course, during the school year, and so I didn't see him a lot. Didn't spend a lot of time with him. And one of the things that really started the art situation was the art teacher at Wheaton High School was married to Grumbacher, who was a big art supply company in Chicago, and she was wonderful. But she was the one that really found DeWitt Whistler Jane, who was a very successful painter, and did illustrations for some of the men's magazines like Sports Afield and things like that. And he was basically a marine painter in that he did all kinds of boats and in different water situations. But his art background came from schooling in England. And so everything was structured. And you didn't start painting until you could draw, and you didn't draw until you understood that trees, for instance, have a skeleton, and none of them are the same, and different species are different. And so she approached him to if I could take art lessons from him. He wasn't very interested at first, but he said he would she should bring some of my work, and I would scribble off stuff. I don't remember what all I was doing, but anyway, but he saw enough in it apparently that he said, well, you have to start from basics, but that's how he had learned in England. And so he was very structured. And I thought I was going to be painting the next day. Not so. I had to draw stick figures, because stick figures were like skeletons. And if you study the skeleton, you understand the proportions. And then of course by this time we also got the medical book going. So now we're putting muscles on the skeletons, and we're making them. We're going for proportion and how to recognize proportion and how to view subjects. One particular, I remember when we finally got to do a face. And we started with the oval, and we from the oval we put various grids in it, where the eyes and where they line up with the corners of the mouth, and the ears in some cases are the same length as the nose. Never telling me that in later life my ears would way outgrow my nose. But anyway, and so the early lessons, and there was no specific time. They'd go as long as he decided he was going to teach, and then he would call my mother and say, "Come get him." and so it was. I was learning a discipline, accidentally, because it was being thrown at me that way. I learned a lot from DeWitt Whistler Jane. And I didn't start painting anything in color for at least 3 years.
So let's go. There's a great story in the book about you managed to get a job at a illustration company, but it's taking out the trash.
The apprentice system was really how things were starting. But then there were apprentice systems in carpentry and plumbing and everything like that. And what was unique is that there are studios with illustrators in them, and to varying degrees of who did what. There were a lot of retouch artists that would work on photographs, and people who did food. Figure people were kind of the higher up, and they were the ones that they were put the pretty lady next to the refrigerator pointing at it and things like that. When some of the illustrators, I got a job at Kling Studio, an apprentice job, and I was in the shipping room, and we had a couple of drawing boards back in where we were supposed to stay, and we created wet paintings and delivered work around Chicago or picking up jobs and bringing them to the studio. They'd be for the certain illustrators that were there. And I was fortunate that Kling had some really top-notch artists, and some of them would take a interest in if they thought you were really serious and you were really going to go someplace, they'd spend a little time with you. Some of them a lot, some of them not so much. But basically they were willing to share what they knew, and if you were smart enough to apply it, you had a chance at what they called going on the board. And at $30 a week, something had to happen, or you were going to have to go find a real job. And I had a couple of really top-notch, nationally known artists that took an interest in what I was trying to do. Because if you're going to be an artist, you're going to have to work at it. And, you leave here at 5 o'clock when everybody leaves here, you should be staying. You should work through the night sometimes. He said, I just don't think you're serious about it. That pissed me off. And I went back to our little apartment, and I started working night and day. And I was, and at that time in illustration, when you weren't working on a job, you were working on what they called samples. And what you went, as many subjects as you wanted to work in, you would make what you would, figure studies or maybe it was mechanical, like the refrigerators or something like that, or foods. At that time, a lot of foods were painted, drawn, photographs. Photography at that time wasn't doing a very good job with them. And so these guys could take a beer jar, a beer tumbler, and make it look wet and cold. And the guy with the photograph, it wasn't as good. And of course, printing wasn't as good. And so the art really was more important than the photography. This all is changing so rapidly. And we just weren't sure what was going to happen. It turned out once I got on the board and actually got paying jobs, that so much of it was like storyboards for television. Meanwhile, television is coming in, and the money advertisers had to use in advertising, so much of it got eaten up with the cost of television. And so, but we were, as illustrators, it was pretty easy for us because they had to do storyboards before they shot a commercial, same way they make movies. And so if you could draw, you kept pretty busy. And it, we were making a living. It wasn't any fun. There's nothing you really wanted to sign your name to. Every once in a while, you get like the posters I did for United Airlines. I said, "Oh boy," but you don't sign them. But at least it was a challenge as an artist.
Did you ever run into Dwayne and Tom Hill? Weren't they in Chicago too?
I was with Roy Anderson and Howard Turpinning. In fact, I took Howard's job.
Okay.
He was with the studio in Chicago, and he went to New York.
Oh, I didn't know he was in Chicago.
Yeah, no, in fact I had his room, and so it was just, I was the next figure guy available, I guess. I don't know, but.
So Howard said that because he was the new guy, he always had to do the hands, because that's what the experienced guys hated to do. And so he got really, really good at doing the hands. And later in life, his hands and his paintings were always spot on.
That's really true. Where you were the contact directly, you didn't have a salesman in between. You were the contact with the art director, and so you'd stop in and say, "Hey, you had to sell yourself." Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. But when you did get a job, all of a sudden you had this deadline. But the problem was, and this is the scary part, was that you were afraid to ever take a vacation even. We never had a vacation. I was afraid that because if you're not ready, they'll go to the next guy. They don't care.
I found myself at a crossroad. Go east and pursue the last vestige of prestigious illustration opportunities, or venture west, where my heart and my dreams were. Illustration and fine art have traditionally been worlds apart. Commercial artists work within greater limitations, carrying out the wishes of their clients. Gallery artists can paint their convictions. I was not good at grasping the immediate task of illuminating an art director's interpretation of a client's idea. And I knew there would be no long-range impact of my efforts, regardless of how much integrity I put into my work. Reynold Brown was an artist legend who befriended me early in my career. He was an important mentor for so many famous California artists, including Dan McCall, John Asaro, and Don Putnam, and many more. He had been an apprentice to famed Western artist and illustrator William Lee. Reynold had a wonderful career creating posters for many Hollywood movies and illustrations for many magazines. In later life, he suffered a stroke, and he and Mary moved to Nebraska with the clean country air, hoping he might be able to paint again. At mutual art shows, he always encouraged me to just paint. Mary called and asked if I'd come up for a week, because Reynold wanted me to paint with him. I was beyond thrilled to do so. He would set up different problems, and I'd paint as he stood behind me, giving me directions and comments. Mostly, use a bigger brush and don't scrub. Then after dinner, we'd walk around the property, with me holding Reynolds' arm, as I listened to him talk about his wonderful career. What a week. That being the first time I'd ever thought about edges, and how important they are to a painting. And then, well, why not a drawing? It changed the way I looked at my photographs and the way I rendered my drawing. I am forever thankful for the friendship of this wonderful couple. The method artists use to express themselves is their business, a means created to achieve an end. However, most artists illuminating realism in the Southwest today choose not to admit to the use of photography in their work. The artist's intelligence projects the talent, the good taste, sincerity, and integrity that assures success. Shoofly has devoted most of his life to art, and his soul rides beside his cowboys. The medium of graphite personifies the fact he works from photographs, and that's okay. How about that cowboy artist hunkered down with an easel, a brush, palette, paint, and a canvas, all of which we assume have been resurrected from saddlebags carried by his horse. In cowboy hat, chaps, boots, and spurs, he has sidelined himself from the herd in order to design, on canvas, a cattle drive of some 372 cows and calves, with 5 cowboys heading them south. In a swirl of bawling, dust, heat, and confusion, he is confident, with integrity, and immensely inspired. He chews the tip of a paintbrush, squints through a thumb, and directs the wagon boss with dignified, artistic authority. "Hey, sir, would you run them by me again?" Well, let's move on to the artwork and spend a little bit of time because people who do pencil drawings are often described as crazy, foolish, and masochistic because it's terribly hard to do those things. Yeah, unlike oil painters, if you make a mistake, you just can't paint over it. I was thinking Tom Hill, the watercolorist, who you knew, had a brush that was one hair brush called a rigger. And I was trying to think if he had to do his entire watercolor with a rigger, which is exactly what you do with your drawings. So could we just start kind of at the beginning, how you do a drawing, establish your values, your composition, those basic sort of things, and then move up to shadows and contrast and some of the more.
I can go through
The process.
the process is finding the photograph or photographs that that interest you, the situation, what story you're trying to tell, and then really try to critique the photograph for all the pitfalls that are going to be there. I mean, they're going to be all of them probably, but some of them you don't notice, and some of them you can fix or change or something. It's just finding the material that you think is something that you feel or want to say.
Yeah, Bob, I've got to give you a compliment. There's very little duplication, repetition in your work. There's very few things that look like another Bob Shoofly Shufelt drawing.
Subject matter wise.
Subject matter wise.
Yeah.
A lot of variety.
Yeah, it's some of them I really have a feeling for what was happening at that time, and whether or not that gets into the picture is my fault. But that's there's a it depends on what you're trying to say. And
So we've got
the horse is tough enough as it is. 8 feet long, and can look like they're all thumbs. And if you don't notice that, then you're going to make a picture of a horse with a lot of thumbs. And and that's the problem with photography, is it'll lie to you. And unless you really understand the horse, she's good when I catch him. Sometimes I'll, he'll be bought on the wrong lead or something like that, and I won't notice it, and she spots it right away.
Well, Julie grew up with horses, so she does have that experience.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So once you get your composition, you get your material, and you know the story you want to tell.
John Asaro had a way he did it. he had a refrigerator crate next to his drawing board, and he would have a slide projector showing into the refrigerator crate, and he would take the focus and throw it out of focus. And he was looking for light and darks, shapes. He was eliminating what he thought would be pitfalls, and then it would refocus it, and it was, in other words, he was looking for possible lights and darks controlling the composition other than just the subject matter, and ones that can be utilized as ones that you have to stay away from. In other words, you're making educated choices, and you're not going through a jillion sketches to do it. You do it just by throwing that picture out of focus a little bit, and it's not foolproof, but it is a way. I'll throw up and throw into I take a look at slides and see if there's if anything can be used, the best part of this and the best part of this, or otherwise I've got nothing. And those are just, they're not tricks, but they're little shortcuts. And I work dark to light. Other people, I don't know how they work, But if my darks look like they're going to help me with with a composition, then dealing with the light makes it a lot easier. Does that make sense?
The way I do it with oils.
Yeah.
Like watercolors a little different, but yeah.
Some of the watercolorists, and I remember, and I can't think of his name now, but it was a watercolorist in Chicago. And I don't know why I was in his studio, but he did barns, lots of barns. And the whole floor of his studio, and I can't remember his name, but the whole floor of his studio were these same barn. And it was obviously this one he didn't like very much, and this one it wasn't any better. And I thought, my God, he's gone through a whole tablet of watercolor paper, and he hasn't got anything that he's going to save.
Well, how do you make darker and lighter shades?
I like to go dark to light.
Okay. Is it a different color pencil, or you just?
Well, it can be. It also could be how hard you push on the pencil. I have found since I have I've lost a lot of fear that I had at the start, and so by getting rid of that feeling, you put anything pretty light and you can probably take it out. But if I'm excited about shapes or something, I get those darks in first. And there's the old thing, if you got a head showing someplace, you better start with a head, because there's no point in doing all this other stuff and getting up the head that blow it.
So I developed a way to teach drawing, okay? A simple, like 4-step process. Go through your process from beginning to end, how you start, what kind of drawing you do first, when you do the steps. Do you have that figured? I mean, you taught it, right? You explained it to. Can you go through what you developed?
I just look for the darks first.
So, but do you start with a gesture? Do you start with that old stick figure? Measurement and proportion?
No, not anymore. No. I just don't care. You probably should, but they take long enough as it is to. I think that's probably overdoing it. Part of it is a fresh approach, and getting your basic information down as quickly as possible, and finding out if there's something in there that isn't going to work, then let's throw that away and we'll try a different way to do it. But basically dark's the first, and with a kneaded eraser, it's amazing what you can pull off if you using. And I lost all my hard racers. I don't know where I lost them, but I'd shave them so I could draw with them, and I haven't find those anymore. They were a white kind of hard rubber, and of course we don't have the greatest art stores in the world here, but those were great because you could shape the edge, and you use the edge to draw with. Basically, I think it's to lay in a
You're working off your photograph, huh?
Well, yeah, but some of it you can't use.
Yeah.
Or you need to really read your photograph. You can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of heartache if you will if you'll critique your basic material. And if there's going to be some problems if you see a problem in your photograph, you're probably going to have a real problem with it when you transfer it to graphite. It's sometimes the really good photographs are not the best art.
How about your sense of composition? Okay, in education, we break it down to principles and elements of composition. You have a pretty good sense of composition in the way you lay out your subject matter.
Sometimes that happens accidentally.
Well, but there's a sense there of when it's right and wrong.
You know,
Do you have rules that you go by?
No. Putt was the first one that said, I remember he said, tell me a rule and I'll break it.
Well, yeah.
And I'll show you how to break it. And he would. He said, well, you can't do this. Oh, yes, you can. Mm-hmm. He was a lot more artist than he ever let people know. He was pretty sharp.
What about the composition that comes from your heart that is attached to your mind's eye that takes the picture?
That's kind of like a trust. I'm not sure it really exists, but I'm glad it does.
It is. It's all connected to your heart. What you see sparks something in your heart that clicks. You don't intellectualize your camera taking. You never set up.
It's something you can't depend on. I mean, you can't build a career on it.
On what?
Why not?
On what?
On what? On I don't know, sometimes things happen and I don't really know why. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad.
Have you ever sat and finished a drawing and said, this is better than what I can do?
I do that a lot. And I would go into the house and I said, we've got to raise our prices. This is the best thing I've ever done. And I go back out the studio and just sit there. Pretty soon, knock on the door, and she opens and walks out. Okay, let's see if we can save this.
No, but
And one of the best drawings I've ever done, and I don't know how in the world I would possibly duplicate it, was In Pursuit of the Rogue Cow. And that was the horse in the water. And I was fine with that. And was kind of having fun anyway. And then the rest of the background went in and boy, I just killed it. It just, oh God, why did I do this? And about the time I'm ready to rip it up, she walks in. And I said, let me look at this. And I said, I'll just tear it up. I'll start over. She said, no, I think that if you do this, if you do that, we're out there for a couple hours.
so what is it at the
And
end of the
it turned out that, I went blank on it. I couldn't see what I could do to save it. And it wasn't good.
So having a trusted person to help critique and work through rough spots?
Only her. Only her.
Only her.
Yeah.
That's important.
I wouldn't ever trust John. He'd cheat you. we had some strange conversations about stuff. I admire his application of paint and his sense of color and everything. And there's some other things that, John, why did you do that? He was a genius.
At the end of a drawing, Bob, I mean this sincerely, because I know you have done this. You've sat there and said, this is a better drawing than what I'm capable of doing. I mean, it's like you took another huge step as far as value control, which is very, very important when you do
If my students learn anything, the one thing that they had to learn, the most important thing, was values. And they can kill you or they can make a piece. And I'd tell them right off the bat, I said, you start off with 3 values. Your darkest dark, a medium, and your whitest white. And if you will think that way, all the other values are going to creep in anyway, but you won't lose the impact of your initial vision. Because you can detail a place, you can detail a painting or a drawing to the point where it's just mush. And the first thing you lose is not shapes, it's values. You can fix shapes, but if you screw your values up, you got too big a job. You just better tear it up, because you're somewhere along the line, if right to left or left to right, you lost it, and you can't get it back.
What about eye stops?
Those pop up so, I mean, you're just not aware of. You kind of look, you can't, it needs to stay on the drawing board for, what?
Tell us, say something, but say eye stops first, or another problem.
Explain that, because I think I know what you're talking about, but use your language.
Yeah,
Because what you just expressed is perfect. What you just talked about for a student to learn something. So now you're getting, I think, into an area of composition that we as teachers use. You call it eye stops. Explain eye stops and the importance of that.
You lose the overall of whatever it is you've done, because there's something over here, and it could be a hairy arm or something that occurred, and your eye just goes to the hairy arm. And you wonder, how in the world did the hairy arm get in there? I mean, that's not what it actually is, but it's something that draws you off the subject into something that is supposed to support the subject, not take away from it. And I'm not sure that I'm that good at recognizing that, and that's, you know, and I lean on her for stuff like that, because I'll get to the point where I don't see it.
I know. We all do that.
What about in values?
In values?
If your darks are too dark in a certain...
Well, that's the values is really what gives you dimension off a one-dimension plane, and I see this in some of my artist friends, and who that they get so carried away with parts and pieces that they lose the whole. And you know, sometimes you get so enthralled with your subject that you don't support the subject with a background. You take away from it, because now the background is more interesting than the subject. Why did you do that?
I always think about young people trying to come into what we've done, okay? And
Yeah.
try and encourage them.
Yeah.
And the more they can hear other artists describe these things that we do, the better, okay?
I'm not so sure that they don't need to stub their toe themselves. I don't know that you can. You can save them on one, but you're not going to save them on all of them. And I think that's something that they have to skin their nose a couple times.
I agree.
And I've done it. I see it mine and said, well, if we blot it, maybe nobody will notice. But it happens.
Bob, over the last couple days now, spending and before hours with your books, and seeing the drawings here in your home, trying to understand you, I've got to say that no two horses have the same face. Every horse that you have drawn has a different character, a different emotion. They are entirely appropriate for the composition you put them in. How did you do that?
Loved them.
What?
Loved them.
Yeah.
Say it.
How did you draw these horses so uniquely? Their eyes are unique. They're perfect for the task they're performing. You know the name of every horse that you've ever drawn. How did that happen?
I think it's love for the animal.
So in addition to the horses, you've drawn a lot of the cowboys you've known through the years. It looks like you're honoring them, but every one looks different, but the same.
Well, they ride differently. I've got one cowboy that I've ridden with for so many years. We all work together. And when we were at our works, you were riding with cowboys that you worked with so many times. We knew where we were going to be when we were going to be there, and it was just a familiarity with them. There were a couple of them weren't very pretty riders. And they had a couple of them that just looked like they were part of the horse. I mean, their skill levels were, but they were all good. But some of them were just phenomenal. I got my friend from Wyoming. He was just he was never wrong. He just rode a horse that way. And it was so easy. Some of the others looked like they were about ready to get bucked off, but but for the most part, these guys were top hands. They would be top hands anywhere, any state. And they worked. They were all old friends. They'd ridden with each other for so many years, and you just knew when we were on work and what we were going to be doing. And to see them sort cattle, that was fun, because they were so good at it. And they did what they did because they were good at it, and there was no, well, I think I'll do this, or I think There was none of that.
What about tracing a photograph, Bob?
Whoa! That doesn't sound like integrity.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can trace the photograph if you want to. You should really interpret the photograph, because there's going to be a lot of stuff in the photograph that's not very good, wrong. The photograph is great in that it stops the light. And I'm very aware of what the light is in my drawing, and where am I getting it? What's the information? Some of it cheats you, but you got to be able to recognize that. Especially, the hardest thing is if you're doing like portrait or faces that are large enough that they are sort of a portrait, even though they're part of a bigger piece. And you kind of have to pick and choose. And some of them will enhance it, and others will just make a piece of junk out of it. If you're going to trace it, you might get some of the good, but you're going to get all the bad. I think, I'll tell you where you can't go wrong. I don't care about nose shapes and things like that, but if you get the eyes, if the eyes are right, and it's the same thing with a horse, if the eyes are right, you're going to be okay. But if you don't get the eyes, you're not going to get it. The eyes will save you.
Cowboying may not seem romantic when I'm bone weary, freezing cold, or hot and dusty. So how can all these uncomfortable sensations make me feel so darn good? I think it's the gratifying feeling of accomplishing something genuine and gaining the respect of those who I admire. I have entered the fraternity of professional cowboys and understand their integrity and camaraderie. These men make little distinction between work and leisure. They pursue their vision of excellence in whatever they do, leaving others to decide whether they are working or playing.
You want to go out west now?
Let's go western.
Okay. Our family was in the West. We had a choice. Illustration was getting tougher and tougher in Chicago. There just wasn't the work. And like I say, Roy Anderson, he worked next to, I knew him before I ever saw him out here. In fact, I didn't know when he left. He was just all of a sudden wasn't there anymore. Of course, in later years, we reconnected, and that all worked as well. But it was a matter of there's some decisions had to be made, and grown-up decisions. Probably the logical thing would have been to go to New York. There was still a lot of work available there, and if you were good, you still had to be good. If you were good, you probably could get your share. But on the other hand, I'd fallen in love with the cowboy life for some reason, horses, and my brother-in-law's Well, the logic being that they had an empty ranch, and they were willing to fix up the Wickenberg place to the point where we could live there and I could pursue this dream. Well, really one of the things that helped a lot was that I would go out like maybe for a week. They were going to be doing something at the Tucson Ranch, and I'd go down and ride with the cowboys down there.
Wickenberg Ranch. Your wife and 2 kids, you've now embarked on this new adventure in Wickenberg, and Julie says, yeah, no, this is great. I'm up for an adventure. I mean, that's pretty rare.
How far was it out of town, Bob?
13 miles and 3 miles into the ranch off the hard road.
And so how long do you guys stay out there?
Do you remember? A year? 2 years?
Year and a half.
About 2 years.
So when did you decide, so you're able to now start drawing full time, but you also have bills to pay. At Wickenberg, how long was it before you decided you had to learn how to cowboy?
Pretty early. Wickenberg had a pretty good gallery at that time.
Let's move back to the Cowboys if we can. Those are pretty good guys.
Yeah.
So you're at Wickenberg and you've decided you know you need.
I started getting a chance to ride on some of these ranches and meeting the cowboys. They were great.
So
they were very supportive.
Now, because you probably sit down and have long conversations with these guys, right?
I don't know if you ever have a long conversation with a cowboy, but some you do. But they appreciated what I was trying to do. I really believe that. And I tried to pay them back, and I didn't have money to give them, but I'd give them some sketches and things.
So you spent a couple of years. I mean, you cowboyed for 20 years, and as Julie said, mostly for free. And but you always had your camera with you. What camera was that? How did you keep that ready for a picture in between?
I finally there was no point in taking a camera bag. It was going to get lost or torn or something. Anyway, I just wore the camera, and just it got beat up as it got beat up.
And then whenever you had 2 minutes between a task, you would whip it out and, oh, I need that picture.
Yeah, kind of. Or I could see things happening. Something's going to happen here, and I wasn't needed. If I was needed, the camera was thrown over my back. But it all depended on what we were doing. And sometimes I missed really good shots that would have been good subject material, but it's in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So there wasn't any opportunity to stage a shot?
Never.
You weren't going to ask those guys, let's bring your horse back here.
No, there was a big story about that from one of the cowboys that I rode with, Gordon Billingsley, the super cowboy. He got to learn more about cows from that man, and he would share. If he thought you were serious, he wouldn't do it a lot. You did get a lot of words, but if he thought you were a cowboy, or were making a cowboy, or trying to make a hand, then he would take you on Otherwise, he wouldn't pay attention to you. And they'll look at your outfit, and they'll make a decision, the kind of spurs you're wearing.
If you're a serious cowboy or not. And,
Yeah.
because like your experience in football, this feels like a team.
Yeah.
And in some respects, only as good as the weakest member of the team.
That's right. Exactly.
Or basic training when you were in the service.
In basic training was me against the sergeants.
So you guys, after you leave Wickenberg, and then you've got another ranch opportunity here in Tucson.
That was the big ranch at Catalina. Yeah, we took over that.
We have resided in 3 small ranching communities during our 20 years in the West. They all shared a common thread in their cafes, especially in the mornings. Pickup trucks of various ages and states of repair decorate the parking lots. The waft of cigarette smoke mixed with fried bacon shrouds the doorways. Retired and day-working cowboys sit in booths, nod greetings, and flirt with the waitress. A society of men in which the conversation rarely deviates in its coverage of good and bad horses, the best-made truck, good and bad outfits, meaning the ranches, sports, guns, appraisals of pretty women, a polite mention of the current events, editorial commentaries on the state of the nation, and major lamenting as to the plight of the rancher in his ongoing battle with government agencies. 2 years after leaving the Midwest, with hundreds of cups of coffee consumed and lots of slow circling, I took hold of some cowboys, or vice versa, and so began my education in the cowboy way. I loved horses before I ever thought of drawing cowboy art, but I wanted to be a cowboy before I could ever afford a horse. Some equestrians behold their animals as perfect beauties, but it's the savvy characters who have my admiration. A good cow horse coming off the side of a canyon may be ugly as sin, but he's a thing of beauty to the cowboy riding him. Trust binds any partnership. My horses teach me lessons in human nature, and I've learned that in order to control the animal, I have to control myself. When gathering cattle out in the middle of nowhere, I don't feel vulnerable or alone, but sense a unity with my horse as we share the adventure. These animals work for me, and I owe them a good life. My heart is full of horses. I rode the same gelding for 18 years. One fall, after arriving at a ranch, a puncher noted that this was probably Loafer's 967th roundup. He's as tough as they come. He had to be because I did all my learning on his back. I hate watching him grow old out in the corral. When I exercise my other geldings, I often pony Loafer and chuckle as I watch him at age 26.